Started on a rainy Thursday night in Seattle, which, let's be honest, isn't saying much. It rains here like it breathes. But that night felt different. I remember standing in front of the mirror adjusting my tie, not because I cared how I looked, but because Lauren did. She'd picked out my shirt, gave me a quick once-over like I was a candidate for a job interview, not her husband of 7 years. "You look good," she said, but it sounded like she was trying to convince herself. I brushed it off. The event was a corporate dinner. Some big internal celebration her company was throwing after a major quarter. She worked for a tech consulting firm, the kind that throws around buzzwords like synergy and agile and has kombucha on tap. Normally, I'd have found a way to politely skip these things, but she insisted I come. Said it was important, that people will be there who could help us both. She meant her, but I didn't press the issue. The restaurant was high-end, one of those rooftop places with glass walls and a view of the skyline. Very Instagram-friendly, very curated. We walked in together, but the moment we crossed the threshold, Lauren transformed. She wasn't my wife anymore. She was Lauren Brooks, Client Solutions lead. Shaking hands, fake laughing, calling people by name and title. I'd seen her like this before in glimpses, but tonight it was full throttle. I didn't mind being on the sidelines. I'm more of a listen and observe type anyway. As she made her rounds, I grabbed a drink and chatted with one of her teammates. A guy named Jeff, I think. Nice enough. He asked how long we'd been together, commented that Lauren never talks about home life, and I laughed awkwardly, unsure how to respond. But halfway through his sentence, I saw her. Lauren. Across the room, her body angled toward a man I didn't recognize. She wasn't talking to him. She was just aware of him constantly. Their eyes met, held for a second too long, then broke away like magnets pushed together. I watched it happen again and again. I leaned over to Jeff. "Who's that guy?" "The tall one with the navy suit and the smug confidence." He smirked. "Nathan Reeves, head of strategic operations. Basically everyone's boss, depending on who you ask." That explained the room's orbit around him. He stood like he belonged there more than the furniture did. People approached him cautiously, their body language tight. But not Lauren. When their eyes met, she adjusted her dress strap. When he laughed at something nearby, she tucked her hair behind her ear. These were small, subtle tells, but I knew them all too well. She used to do those things around me. I kept watching. Not obsessively, not jealously. Just enough to notice the frequency. Glance. Smile. Tuck. Glance again. It was a cycle. Maybe nothing on its own, but as a pattern. It made my stomach turn. When she finally returned to my side, she was flushed. Whether from wine or adrenaline, I couldn't say. She looped her arm through mine like a photo prop. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "Of course," she said, brushing it off like I'd asked if the appetizers were too spicy. "Just a lot going on tonight." On the ride home, Seattle's traffic crawled as usual. I kept my eyes on the red taillights ahead of us while she scrolled through her phone. The silence stretched too long, so I asked casually, "So, Nathan?" He seemed popular. She didn't look up. "He's my department head. Pretty much oversees every major account now." "And you two seem close," I added, trying to sound observational, not accusatory. That got her attention. She locked her phone and finally looked at me. "Why would you say that?" "No reason," I said, knowing full well that pretending not to notice was worse than pretending not to care. She sighed. "Look, he's not someone you can afford to offend. He can make or break careers. That's just the reality. I have to stay on his good side." "That why you were twirling your hair every time he laughed?" Her expression darkened. "Seriously? You're reading into things now." "Am I?" "Yes," she snapped. "That's work. That's politics. You wouldn't get it. It's not like your job has this kind of pressure." There it was again. The subtle jab. She always used to complain that I coasted in my job. I'm an IT systems engineer. I build real things. She networks. We've always been different that way, but lately she acted like my whole career was some backseat to her social climb. "What I meant," she continued, her voice icy now, is that these relationships matter, not just for me, for you too. If Nathan likes us, that could open doors. If you had a better attitude about this, you might see that. I stared out the window, the raindrops racing each other across the glass. Her us didn't feel like us anymore. It felt like a costume she wore when it benefited her, and hung up in the closet when it didn't. What she said made sense. That's the part that got to me. It sounded reasonable. She hadn't technically done anything wrong. She hadn't even touched the guy. But you don't defend a look unless there's something behind it. That was the line that stuck in my head. At home, she went straight upstairs to check emails. I stayed behind, loosening my tie, my fingers numb. I couldn't let go of that feeling, something subtle but rotten underneath. Like finding a hairline crack in a windshield and knowing it's only a matter of time before it spreads. I tried to sleep that night, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw her looking at him. Not me. Him. And the worst part? She didn't feel the need to hide it. After that dinner, everything changed, but not outwardly. Lauren still kissed me goodbye in the mornings. She still asked if I wanted anything when she ordered takeout. Still replied with "love you too" if I said it first. On the surface, nothing had shifted. But inside me? Something cracked. And once a crack forms, everything else starts to splinter. The weird thing was, I didn't want to believe my instincts. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. Overthinking. That dinner had just caught me on a bad night, that I was projecting my own insecurities. But even as I tried to rationalize it, I started noticing things I'd probably ignored before, or maybe they weren't there before. Lauren started staying late more often. Not just an hour or two whole evenings. Team strategy sessions, she said. Client calls with the East Coast. And I wanted to believe her. But every time I called, her phone would go to voicemail. When I texted, the replies were delayed or dry. And once, just once, I called back-to-back 4 times. On the 5th try, it rang once before cutting out. When she came home that night, she claimed she'd been in a building with bad reception. I nodded, but I didn't believe her. Then there were the training trips. These weren't rare, but they suddenly became more frequent, sometimes with only a few days' notice. She'd always leave early in the morning, come back late the next night, hair slightly styled but messy, the kind of look you get when you change outfits in a rush. I'd ask about the trip and she'd give vague answers. It went fine. Long day. Same old stuff. But when I asked specifics, where the seminar was held, who ran it, what they discussed, she'd get defensive. "Why are you interrogating me?" she asked once, slamming her suitcase on the bed a little harder than necessary. "I'm not. I just want to know how your trip went." "Well, maybe if you supported me instead of questioning me, I'd feel like sharing." That was new. Lauren used to love telling stories about work. She used to vent about annoying clients or go on long tangents about company politics. Now the stories were just gone. Sterilized. Controlled. Our anniversary came up around that time. 7 years married. I wasn't expecting fireworks, but I figured we'd at least do dinner, maybe walk by the lake like we used to. Instead, she handed me a gift, an expensive watch I'd never asked for, right before heading to the office. "I've got meetings all day," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "We'll celebrate this weekend." She didn't even make eye contact. I opened the box and stared at the watch, wondering what message she was trying to send. It was sleek, flashy, and totally not me. That's when it hit me, she hadn't picked it for me. She picked it for the man she wanted me to be. The kind of man who'd wear a $500 statement piece at a networking brunch. And that's what it all felt like. Like she wasn't sharing a life with me anymore, she was managing me. Curating me. There was this constant pressure to upgrade, to change, to become more presentable for her crowd. Every time we went out, she'd suggest what I should wear. The blazer, not the hoodie. Don't bring up politics, some of these people are donors. Don't joke about the company, that stuff gets around. At first, I chalked it up to professional polish. But it started happening in private too. We'd be having drinks with her coworkers and she'd correct how I pronounced a word. One time, she jumped in to explain a story I was telling, my story, because I wasn't telling it clearly. Even small jokes I made, she'd sweat them down with a fake laugh and a glance around the room as if gauging reactions. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. I started to feel less like a partner and more like a prop. And yet I kept trying to make it work. I bought nicer clothes. I went to those endless wine and cheese events where people talked about their investments and yoga retreats. I smiled through it all. I kept telling myself this was just a rough patch, a busy season, a temporary disconnect. But the more I bent, the more she seemed to pull away. One evening, we attended a charity mixer. It was hosted by a local nonprofit Lauren had recently started supporting. More as a social ladder than a cause. if I'm being honest. Everyone there wore smug smiles and shook hands like they were closing deals, not raising money. I remember standing alone near the bar, watching her across the room. She was mid-conversation with some guy in a tailored suit, laughing, touching his arm. Not Nathan, someone new. Someone who didn't know she was married until I walked over. He looked at me like I was the valet. "Oh, you're Lauren's husband?" he asked. "She never mentioned you." She laughed nervously. "We don't always talk shop," she said, taking my arm like an afterthought. I drove home in silence that night. She didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't say anything, really. The next day, I found her phone on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. I didn't mean to look through it. I really didn't. But it lit up with a notification, some event invite. I tapped it, and it opened to a calendar with a bunch of color-coded entries. Meetings, flights, personal dinners. All organized. All selective. Most of them were labeled things like strategy prep or client coffee. But one stood out. End drinks at Zephyr, 7 p.m. No last name. Just an initial. I knew who it was. I didn't confront her. Not then. I closed the app, set the phone back exactly where it was, and walked out to the porch. I sat there for nearly an hour, just watching the rain hit the sidewalk, each drop adding to the puddles I hadn't noticed before. That's what it felt like. One drop at a time, slowly pooling into something impossible to ignore. That night, as we got ready for bed, Lauren asked if I was feeling okay. "Yeah," I said. "Just tired." She nodded and kissed my cheek, then turned over without another word. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind buzzing. That calendar entry haunted me, because it wasn't just the drinks. It was the fact that she hadn't told me, that it wasn't on our shared calendar, that it was with him and she only used his initial. You don't use initials unless you're trying to hide something. You don't keep your phone face down unless you're worried about what someone might see. And you don't treat your spouse like a liability unless you're already halfway out the door. The more I looked back, the more everything lined up. The long hours, the coldness, the curated image, the way I'd become a placeholder in my own life. Somewhere along the line, I stopped being her husband and became part of her resume. That's when I knew I wasn't imagining this. I wasn't being paranoid. Something was wrong, and it had been for a long time. It happened on a Wednesday, completely unplanned. I was in the area for a client meeting that had wrapped up earlier than expected. I figured I'd surprise Lauren at her office, maybe take her out for lunch like we used to. I hadn't told her I'd be nearby. Honestly, I thought it might rekindle something. Remind her that this wasn't always just logistics and event invites and cold silences over dinner. The building her company occupied was one of those sleek, modern glass cubes, all exposed beams and concrete. As I rode the elevator up to the 10th floor, I was actually nervous. Not scared. Nervous. Like I was walking into an audition I hadn't prepared for. I don't know why I felt that way. Maybe I did. The office was quiet. Typical open floor plan with no real privacy. Just clusters of desks and a few glass-walled conference rooms along the edges. As I stepped inside, nobody stopped me. I knew the front desk clerk, and she gave me a quick nod and said, "Lauren's in a meeting, but she should be done soon." I said thanks, and instead of sitting in the lobby like a normal person, I wandered. I don't know what I was hoping to find. Maybe just a glimpse of the Lauren I used to know, laughing with coworkers, being her old self. But what I saw stopped me cold. Through one of the glass conference room walls, I saw them, Lauren and Nathan, sitting side by side, not across from each other like professionals. Close, too close. His body was angled toward hers, his sleeve brushing hers as he leaned in to say something. She was laughing. Not just politely, but with her head tilted back, her hand grazing his forearm. And then, just before standing to leave, his hand slipped from the table and rested, casually but deliberately, on her knee. Her hand went to her hair. I stood frozen in place, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. There wasn't any dramatic kiss, no over-the-top embrace. But in some ways, this was worse. It was int*mate. Natural. Practiced. She didn't pull away. They stood and exited the room together, but instead of turning back toward the open office, they veered toward the side staircase that led to the garage level. That's when I stepped back into a cubicle row to avoid being seen. As they passed, I caught a better look at her. Her phone buzzed and she glanced at it. I recognized the notification banner. It was my name. She didn't open the message. She didn't even slow down. She just slid the phone into her purse as if the idea of answering me was a burden. A punch in the gut would have felt kinder. I left the office without saying a word to anyone. I took the elevator down in silence, barely holding myself together as the doors closed. My reflection in the mirrored panels looked like someone else, a version of me I didn't recognize. A man watching his marriage rot from the inside out. Outside, I sat in my car for a long time, trying to catch my breath. My hands were trembling, not from rage, not yet. From disbelief. From the sick realization that all the doubts I'd buried were right. That my instincts weren't just paranoid, they were prophetic. This wasn't just flirting. It wasn't workplace camaraderie or power dynamics or networking. I'd seen enough. That night, she came home late. She didn't even offer an excuse. Just walked in, kicked off her heels, and gave me the same tired smile she always did now. Not guilty. Not even cautious. Just distracted. Like I was background noise. I asked, "Long day?" She nodded. "Back-to-back meetings." I nodded too. "Anything interesting happen?" She shrugged, pulling off her earrings. "Same as always." That was the moment I stopped pretending. Not just to her, but to myself. I had seen the way she looked at him. The way she leaned into his space like it belonged to her. I'd seen the touch, the silence after my message, the small decisions that weren't mistakes, they were choices. But I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of a confrontation, not yet. I wasn't going to storm in, throw accusations, and let her pivot the story into "you're overreacting" or "it's not what it looks like." No. This needed to be handled on my terms. I played it cool for the rest of the evening, but inside I was already shifting gears. Every word she spoke felt rehearsed. Every glance toward her phone a lie. I watched her, studied her the way you might study a stranger across the room whose language you don't speak. I'd lived with this woman for nearly a decade and I didn't recognize her anymore. The following day I started digging. Carefully. Quietly. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who spies or snoops. But when someone builds a second life behind your back, they don't leave the truth neatly labeled. You have to find it in the margins, in the casual lies, in the little details they don't think you're smart enough to notice. Her work email was locked down, but her laptop? Not so much. One night after she fell asleep, I opened it. She'd left it on the kitchen counter, and I told myself I was only going to look at the calendar. But what I found made my chest ache. A folder named Presentations Q4 buried inside her desktop, tucked under some innocuous spreadsheets. Inside, there were PDFs, dozens of them. At first, I thought they were work-related, but then I opened one. It was a scanned bar receipt from a lounge uptown, timestamped 11:43 p.m. on a Wednesday. The night she said she had a late conference call with London. 2 drinks, both premium scotch. One name on the tab, Nathan Reeves. Another was an image, slightly blurry, clearly taken from a distance, of her and Nathan leaving the same place. Her coat was draped over his arm. She looked like she was laughing. There were more. *TS of texts, exported from a backup I hadn't even known she stored locally. The messages weren't explicit, no *sting, no declarations of love, but they were real. Real enough. "Let's not do the rooftop again, it's too visible. I missed your voice in that call today. You always calm me down. I need to feel like this more often." Each one another nail in the coffin. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table until sunrise, just empty. I'd expected anger. But what I felt was worse, nothing. Numbness. Like someone had cut out my heart and replaced it with cold stone. At 6:30 a.m. she padded into the kitchen in a robe, rubbing her eyes. She looked surprised to see me awake. "You okay?" she asked. "Couldn't sleep," I said. "Had a lot on my mind." She nodded and reached for her coffee mug, the one I got her last year for Valentine's Day. The one that said, "Still my favorite person." It felt like a joke now. She sat across from me, scrolling her phone while the kettle boiled. I stared at her, wondering how long she'd been gone. Not physically, but emotionally. How long had I been holding on to a version of her that didn't exist anymore? When she finally looked up, I asked, "Do you ever think about us? About how we used to be?" She blinked, then smiled softly. "Of course. All the time." I nodded. "Funny. I was just wondering how much of it was real." She paused. "What's that supposed to mean?" But I didn't answer. Because deep down, we both already knew. I think there's a specific moment, so subtle you almost miss it, when pain stops being sharp and starts becoming cold. Not frozen, exactly. Just numbed. Like your mind says, okay, we've done enough crying. Let's get to work. That moment came 2 days after I found the receipts, the texts, the images. After seeing the woman I married not just betraying me, but doing it comfortably. Repeatedly. Strategically. I didn't explode. I didn't confront her. I didn't pack a bag and storm out. Instead, I cleaned the house. That sounds ridiculous, I know. But I spent an entire afternoon vacuuming, reorganizing the kitchen drawers, doing laundry, not because I cared how things looked, but because I needed control over something. While she was out, I alphabetized the spice rack, folded all the towels the way she liked, put everything in its place, including my emotions. When Lauren walked in that evening, she didn't notice. She was on the phone, laughing about some client dinner. She waved at me, mouthed hi, and kept talking as she walked upstairs. That's when I knew I was invisible. And not in the tragic, poetic sense. I was literally a background character in the story of her life. A set piece. A status symbol. Someone to nod at from across the room when necessary, but otherwise replaceable. It hit me that I had stopped being a husband to her a long time ago. Maybe around the time her team started calling her the fixer. Maybe when Nathan got promoted. Maybe when she stopped telling me anything real. So I decided if she made me a display, I'd become a mirror. The first thing I did was start asking questions quietly. Not to Lauren. To people who knew her in ways I didn't. I reached out to 2 former coworkers I'd met at a retreat the year before. One of them, Alex, worked under Lauren before transferring departments. I bought him coffee under the pretense of catching up. Casual. No pressure. I always respected Lauren, he said, sipping his drink, but man, she's intense. Especially this year. I asked what he meant. He hesitated. Let's just say she's great at getting credit. Even when the rest of us did the heavy lifting. I raised an eyebrow. Like what? He looked around, lowered his voice. That whole Evergreen Analytics project? The one that won her team of the quarter? That was mostly Amanda and Ravi. Lauren barely touched it, but she knew how to pitch it to leadership. She's smart that way. I nodded slowly. She ever get close with leadership? I asked, trying to sound like I meant it professionally. Alex gave me a look. You mean Nathan? I didn't respond. He took another sip. A lot of people noticed, man. They never confirmed anything, but she got real cozy with him fast. Like, fast. I thanked him, changed the subject, and left that conversation with more clarity than I expected. Lauren wasn't just having an affair, she was calculating her ascent. Using proximity as leverage. Positioning herself near power and stripping away the parts of herself that didn't align with that image. Including me. That night, I sat down with a legal pad and started writing. Not a plan for revenge, not some Hollywood-style expose, but a list. A detailed, honest list of everything I had done for her career that she never acknowledged. Helped write proposals when she was stuck. Prepped slides for her quarterly reviews. Stepped in to host dinner parties when she needed to impress coworkers. Fielded crisis calls from her team on weekends when she was too overwhelmed to deal with it. Covered for her with clients when she overbooked herself. You'd be surprised how many things you forget you've done until you see them on paper. And for what? So she could erase me from the narrative? I wasn't going to let her do that. The next step was research. I started reviewing her company's leadership page, public reports, LinkedIn posts, any information I could find about the projects she'd claimed as hers. What I found confirmed what Alex had said. Lauren had positioned herself as the face of 3 major initiatives over the past year. In every external mention, she was listed as the lead or architect. But cross-referencing the team members listed in old press releases told a different story. She was riding on credit, on reputation, and on proximity to Nathan. I dug further and found a private Slack community some of her coworkers used. I had been added once during a virtual holiday party and never left. Quietly, I searched through old threads. And there it was, jokes, passive-aggressive comments, even some direct messages I probably wasn't meant to see. She's not even pretending anymore. Is it just me, or is she literally following Reeves to every offsite? She took the demo deck from Jamie and presented it like she built it herself. She's good. But fake good, you know? Like curated. Every line hit like a cold splash of water. Not because I needed them to validate what I already knew, but because it confirmed this wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was systemic. Patterned. Lauren had been reinventing herself at my expense. And the worst part was I'd helped her do it. I started saving everything *TS, timelines, overlapping schedules. Not to use as ammunition, but to protect myself. I wasn't going to get blindsided. If this blew up, I wasn't going to be the man left in the wreckage wondering what went wrong. A week later, she mentioned another company gathering. It's just a leadership mixer, she said over coffee. A few of us are hosting. Nathan will be there, so it's kind of important. I looked up from my cup. Want me to come? She paused just for a second. Sure, she said. But can we keep it low-key? It's mostly for internal alignment. No need to network or anything. Translation, don't make a scene. Don't ask questions. Don't disrupt the image. That night, she emailed me a list of talking points. Yes, a literal list. Try to focus on these topics, she wrote. They'll help us stay aligned with the right people. Topics included the firm's digital expansion success, my experience with early-stage implementation, which she had rehearsed for me. Avoid politics, personal anecdotes, or too much humor. I stared at the email for a long time, and then I smiled, because now I knew exactly what I was walking into. A stage. A performance. And this time I was ready to act not as the supporting husband but as the quiet storm. Over the next few days I sharpened my approach. I didn't just memorize my lines, I rewrote them. I reached out to 2 more colleagues, gathered real accounts of how her teams had operated, and started crafting the version of the story she'd never expected anyone to tell, the truth. Not loud, not vengeful, just accurate. Because sometimes the most devastating thing you can do to a liar is tell the truth at the exact moment they expect you to stay silent. And when the night of that mixer arrived, I wore the exact watch she'd bought me for our anniversary. Not because I liked it, but because I wanted her to know I remembered everything. The night of the mixer arrived like the final act of a play I hadn't asked to be part of, but I'd learned my role by heart. It was held in a penthouse suite downtown, a place I recognized from a previous event Lauren had dragged me to, full of glass and marble, where the view of the city was more important than the people standing in it. From the moment we stepped out of the elevator, the air was heavy with ego. You could feel it in the way people held their drinks, how they smiled with just their mouths, and in how every conversation was a performance. Lauren had picked out my outfit. A dark blue blazer over a gray button-down, sharp but not showy, she'd said. She'd chosen a silver tie pin to match the watch she gave me, the same one I now wore like a wee *p*, and not an accessory. We walked in together, her arm looped through mine, a power couple on display. I wasn't nervous. Not anymore. I had spent the last week gathering facts, not rumors. Testimonials, not theories. I wasn't going to throw a tantrum or make a scene. I wasn't here to embarrass her, I was here to remove the mask she'd been parading around in. Not with screaming. With subtlety. With timing. The suite was packed, executives, senior partners, a few new faces trying to look like they belonged. Nathan stood near the bar, talking to a circle of admirers like some corporate deity. Lauren's eyes found him immediately, then flicked away when she noticed me watching. We mingled. I let her lead. She introduced me with the same rehearsed warmth she always used. "This is my husband," she'd say, then pivot to some compliment about my background, carefully edited for the crowd, of course. We joined a circle of department heads, including 2 people I'd seen on conference calls with Lauren. I let her take the lead until someone asked how the transition on their digital rollout was managed. The group looked to Lauren, expecting the usual narrative. That's when I stepped in. Well, I said casually, it was a close one. That implementation almost collapsed during the second phase. The back end wasn't ready. It was the overnight team, Jaden's group, I think, that built a workaround with less than 12 hours notice. The room went quiet for a second. Lauren blinked. Yes, she said, recovering. That was a collaborative moment. But the strategy had been in place for her. And I remember when that server crashed during the demo, I continued, not missing a beat. It was Ravi who patched it manually, right? While you were in flight. Her jaw tightened just slightly. Well, yes. But we'd anticipated that risk. I flagged it in the pre-briefing. Someone in the group nodded. I didn't know Ravi was the one who patched it. That saved the client presentation. Yeah, I said, sipping my drink. A lot of people did a lot of heavy lifting that week. Lauren's team is solid. Quiet heroes, really? Lauren gave me a glance. It wasn't a glare, not quite. More like a warning. But I wasn't antagonizing. I was elevating the truth just loud enough for the right people to hear. Throughout the evening, I kept it going, small, precise interjections that gently contradicted the polished image she had built for herself. Not to tear her down, but to pull the curtain back just enough. At one point, someone brought up her team's impressive retention rate, and I smiled politely. Well, it helps that the team covers for each other when leadership is double-booked, I said. I remember that week you had back-to-back panels, and it was Amanda who ran the crisis call while you were at that symposium. Lauren laughed too loudly. It's all about trust, she said. Delegating well. Nathan joined our circle at one point. He greeted Lauren first, then nodded at me. Mark, right? That's me. Glad you could make it. I hear you've got quite the background in systems engineering. Sure do, I said. Came in handy when Lauren's VPN wouldn't connect during that Hong Kong pitch. We were up at 2 a.m. troubleshooting. Lauren ******* me a look. I held eye contact. Good times, I added. Nathan chuckled awkwardly and moved on. Later, during the speeches, Lauren was asked to say a few words. She gave the usual corporate fluff, thanked her team, emphasized leadership, resilience, synergy. She was polished. Perfect. By the end, people clapped politely. As she stepped down, someone near me whispered, she really knows how to own a room. I smiled. She's had a lot of practice. When the evening wound down, I found myself standing near a group of colleagues who weren't watching her, they were watching me. One of them, a woman in operations I vaguely recognized, stepped closer and said, "You're the one who helped fix the analytics debacle last quarter, right? The version control issue?" I blinked. How do you know about that? I was in the escalation call. Heard your name. Surprised you never got a mention in the wrap-up. Not that surprising, I said, smiling slightly. We all play our parts. She nodded slowly, understanding more than I said. On the ride home, Lauren was quiet. I could feel the tension radiating off her like static. Halfway through the drive, she finally spoke. What was that tonight? What do you mean? That little game you played. Undermining everything. I didn't undermine anything, I said. I added context. Don't be smug, Mark. You know exactly what you were doing. I was being honest. She scoffed. You humiliated me. No, Lauren, I said, turning to face her. I clarified things. Gave people a fuller picture. You're welcome. She didn't respond. At home, she went straight upstairs, muttering something about a migraine. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, the memory of the evening still warm in my chest. I hadn't exposed her. I hadn't needed to. All I'd done was remind the room that no one climbs alone and that not every polished story holds up under scrutiny. That night, for the first time in months, I slept soundly. Because for once, I wasn't biting my tongue. And the image she'd built of herself? It wasn't just cracking. It was starting to reflect the truth. The morning after the mixer, I invited Lauren to breakfast at the restaurant where I'd proposed to her. She walked in wearing the same white blouse she'd worn years ago when we'd first come here, only now the fabric didn't carry warmth. It felt like a costume. She smiled cautiously, probably thinking this was my peace offering. I didn't drag things out. I slid the manila envelope across the table. Divorce papers, I said. No theatrics. No raised voice. Her expression didn't crumble, it calcified. She blinked slowly, as if giving herself time to compute it, then whispered, You're serious? I am. She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. Lauren, you can overcome a mistake. But this? This was methodical. This was you choosing to erase me from your life while still using me as a prop. I'm done playing that role. She looked out the window, jaw clenched, trying to find some angle to control the narrative. We're just in a rough spot. We could fix this. People come back from worse. No, I said. People come back from honesty. Not lies stretched over months. For the first time in a long while, she had nothing to say. I signed the final page and left it on the table. By next week, you'll get the notice. I've already spoken to a lawyer. As I stood to leave, she said, almost involuntarily, You're really doing this? I'm fixing what you broke. And this time, it's for me. The weeks that followed were quiet, but not the kind of silence that feels empty. This one felt clean. No more fake dinner conversations, no more adjusting myself to fit her ideal. The air in my home felt breathable again. I moved out of our downtown condo and found a smaller place a few miles north, nothing fancy, but it felt real. The kind of place where I could hear my thoughts again. I got back in touch with people I'd neglected, friends who drifted because I'd been too busy playing the part Lauren needed me to. I started picking up freelance work, consulting directly with companies that valued what I brought to the table, not what events I could attend or who I was married to. A month later, I got a call from a former client who'd heard about my situation. He offered me a role heading up a new department. Clean slate. New environment. No politics, just good, honest work. I accepted. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I realized something important. Correction doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it's just the quiet decision to stop shrinking for someone who never intended to grow with you. I wasn't healing to prove a point. I was healing because I finally remembered who I was before she tried to rewrite me. And I liked that guy.